Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Vincent Payne. I'm the Director of Technology and Services here at Arrow. Today we are having a conversation with Tenable and discussing the topic of DevOps. So firstly, I'd like to welcome Nathan Dyer, Director of Product Marketing for Tenable. Hi Nathan.
Hi Vince, glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Great. And we're also joined by Adam Lever, our DevOps Architect. Hi Adam.
Hello, yeah, really looking forward to having this discussion. Thank you.
So let's jump in. Nate, can you give us a bit of a background to sort of a brief history on Tenable and why the success?
Sure, happy to. So Tenable, for those of you who are not familiar with Tenable, we are the cyber exposure company. We've been in the world of vulnerability management now for over 22 years. If you haven't heard of Tenable in the past, you've definitely heard of some of our sub-brands like Nessus, which has been one of the pioneers in the world of vulnerability assessment now for many decades. And so what we do at Tenable is our heritage is around vulnerability management, right? We look at, across an organization's attack surface, looking for assets, vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, and really helping security teams prioritize, which of those security issues to remediate and fix first, right? And over the past couple of years, we've kind of shifted our focus a bit to try to transform the industry to move away from more of a technical counting exercise of how many assets are impacted by specific vulnerabilities, and instead focus on what is the actual cyber risk that those vulnerabilities and misconfigurations pose to an organization. And so, helping to elevate the conversation around vulnerabilities to more of a C-suite and board level conversation where we can start to discuss these issues using metrics and KPIs and other quantifiable stats to show how exposed and how at risk an organization is. And so, that's where we've been spending a lot of our focus and trying to elevate the game of VM to be much more risk-based in nature.
Thanks, Nate. So Adam, can you give us a bit of an insight into, given your background in being a DevOps engineer for the last few years and sort of vulnerability management, can you give us a little bit of insight into this whole sort of shift left metaphor?
Yeah, so the concept of shifting left has been historically applied from the beginning of DevOps to just infrastructure. So it's really about sort of treating sort of things that weren't traditionally consistent and might have been a little bit more ad hoc, and treat them in the same way you would treat sort of your source code, sort of document, having the code version controlled and managed and repeatable, and that just ensures reliability and scalability. And bringing security sort of into that area is fantastic because it really stops security being this sort of siloed part of the DevOps workflow, and really brings it in early and then sort of stops a lot of these problems before they become a major issue, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. No, that's great. And Nate, with that sort of piece, given that the background of Tenable has been, we've always known it for the development of the Nessus technology, and the more, I guess, traditional sort of areas. With this move towards containers and the software development, what have you guys been doing to sort of help ensure that we have that sort of common protection across the attack surface?
Yeah, and so I think you raise a great point about DevOps being, certainly a big kind of boon for developers and the business in terms of their agility and their code velocity. And I think what we're seeing in the world of vulnerability management is they introduce, some new challenges that security teams may not be prepared for without changing mindsets and changing new capabilities. And so, one good example that I think Vince used raised with containers is that, these are brand new types of assets and form factors that have very short life cycles. They're very dynamic, very ephemeral. And so by employing traditional scanning approaches, with network scanners, for example, many containers would be invisible, through those scans. So you need a new approach to gain visibility into those new types of assets. Serverless is another good example of assets and services that might only run for a matter of minutes and then turn off and be decommissioned. And so that's a big problem for us in the world of vulnerability management. The other aspect here that really changes the game for us in security is the fact that we're talking about continuous deployment and continuous changes being introduced in the environment, right? And if there's something that security teams are uncomfortable with, it's change. And so how do security teams kind of keep up with that rapid pace of change, deploying multiple times a day without being a gatekeeper or a barrier or a blocker to speed? Right, and so there's new approaches that organizations and security teams need to take to enable that change. And then I guess the last thing I'll talk about in terms of a challenge is that vulnerability management in general needs to really evolve to ensure that security teams have full visibility across their attack surface. Part of that is actually partnering with DevOps and being embedded in the whole DevOps process so that security teams know exactly what's coming from those development teams at any given time. But there's also a big part of it that has to happen in runtime and post-deployment to ensure that the services and the assets that are being pushed out in production are indeed secure and not introducing too much risk into the organization. And so we've been working for quite some time to kind of figure out how to support security teams in this whole new DevOps paradigm, and so it's a mix of people and processes, but also new capabilities and technologies that support that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Adam, can you give us some insight into when you've been developing software in the past and using code libraries and sort of things, where have there been some failure points perhaps where you can see now we would be protected if we put something like Tenable in place?
Yeah, so one thing I have noticed is with things such as like open source technologies and sort of common containers that are pretty useful for multiple purposes, is that while it's great that these are pretty universal and they can be sort of collaborated on, if a vulnerability exists in one of these highly popular containers, it's very sort of well known. So as we've started to adopt those, I think our environments have become less unique and then therefore a little bit more vulnerable in that sense. So it's sort of maybe an unwanted side effect of that kind of collaboration.
No, good, yeah. And with that sort of very thing in mind, if for our partner community go and talk to individuals and companies, Adam, where would you sort of point them in terms of should we be talking to the security people? Should we be talking to the dev people? I guess it's a bit of an open question, but let's get started, Adam. Where's a good starting point for some of our security sort of partners?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to talking to security people, they'll be quite interested in this because when packages sort of become vulnerable and sort of patches are released, it would be helpful to know how at risk our users are with certain packages and just sort of give them the right tools to remediate those issues sooner rather than later. So it is fantastic for security people because they can have a little bit more confidence that these things, when they inevitably happen, will be flagged and fixed very quickly. And it is also useful for developers if they can consider security as they're developing. It increases the agility for them as they won't have to sort of have that long wait period between writing the code and having the code of the service and then having it validated by the security teams.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a really good point because the whole digital world we live in today is very much about being agile and getting to market quicker. Any interesting sort of projects, Nate, where you've seen sort of Tenable go and solve some problems and sort of drive some better outcomes? Yeah,
and actually, let me weigh in on the previous question first, and I'll cover on the outcome question second. But I definitely echo Adam's point. It's an interesting kind of mindset shift here because in the short term, I think partners will have a lot more success. Certainly engaging in their security contacts. But I think the change here with secure DevOps and DevSecOps in general is that we have to encourage security teams to actively collaborate and work together with the DevOps organizations within their shop if they haven't done so already, right? Because when you enable DevSecOps types of solutions, many of these solutions are starting to touch developer tool chains like CI systems, for example. And anytime you have a security integration within a developer pipeline, you need the buy-in of the developer and DevOps teams. Otherwise, the project and the initiative is not going to be successful. And so security is still going to be the primary focal, I think, at least in the short term and medium term for the next few years in terms of who we're selling to. But I think looking at it long term, looking way out like 10, 15, 20 years, I think we're going to start to sell more and more security solutions directly to the DevOps organizations themselves as they become much more proficient and more security aware, I think, of the value that security brings, certainly from a quality control standpoint for DevOps processes. But look, going back, Vince, to your question about use cases and where we're seeing success, I think as organizations are starting to invest in cloud services and certainly new computing models, as I mentioned before, like containers and serverless, that changes how organizations are thinking about deploying new security products and services. There's going to be certainly a lot more appetite for software as a service based offerings that can help securely manage these new types of modern assets, usually deployed in the cloud. And so I know one of the primary use cases in that model is around visibility, being able to see everything and having almost like a real-time and continuous visibility across multiple clouds and multiple cloud accounts that are being deployed across the organization is really paramount. So being able to view the compute nodes and services, all the different resources that are being used as well, from a single pane of glass is really, really essential. But also, being able to, take advantage of automation is another aspect that is really driving a lot of success within our customer accounts. So, making sure that, security products have open APIs, for example, that can be easily, leveraged and allow our security teams to compose new services and programmatically kind of manage scans and deploy scanners and consume results and start to enforce policies. APIs are kind of the way that security teams can keep up with that rapid pace of change. And so I would say that would be another kind of primary use case that sellers should look at when they're talking about secure DevOps.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're talking some quite technical things here. At the beginning, you raised the sort of point, Nate, about raising the conversation with the sort of C-level folk within organisations. And do you find that clearly cyber risk exposure is a highly discussed thing for obvious reasons today? Are we? Do you think our partners talking to the right level of people in customers to gain sort of better traction?
Yeah, and that's a great point, because when you're talking to your manager, director level folks, even at the practitioner level, typically the sales conversations are still focused on more technical details of how many assets are out there, what types of vulnerabilities exist, even getting into some of the severity scores within the vulnerabilities themselves. But as you start to elevate the conversation and speak to higher levels in an organization, even at the CISO level, they don't care about the numbers of vulnerabilities and assets impacted, right? As I mentioned before, they actually care about what's the impact and what's their exposure to being attacked or being potentially impacted by a cybersecurity incident, right? And so being able to kind of quantify and develop the right metrics to show value, not only to the CISO level within the account, but also helping the CISO communicate risk to other non-technical stakeholders within their peer group, within their organization is really, really essential. And so, you have to, as you sell higher in the organization, you need to really flesh out and express, the value of security solutions in terms of key metrics that are quantifiable and objective, and really take a lot of the glorp out of the underlying security capabilities in terms of the reporting and dashboards and the like. The other thing I'll mention as well that really resonates with a lot of CISOs as you start to elevate the conversation is really taking advantage of solutions that can provide benchmarking capabilities. Because CISOs and senior executives within security teams like to see how their metrics compare against their peers within a given industry, within a given geography, or if within the general populace at large, to show how well they're faring overall. So it's not just about the raw KPIs and metrics, but also putting that in context using benchmarks as much as possible.
That's really interesting. Okay, and if we go back to sort of our partners and around Tenable and moving into the whole sort of DevSecOps arena, are there any sort of points, any recommendations, Nate, that you would sort of put out there to help them make the right decisions about, firstly kind of investing in Tenable, and then how to build maybe sort of a Tenable business?
Yeah, and so I think there's a couple of things that partners should be thinking about. First is, definitely pushing on your security contacts and security leads to, have those conversations with DevOps if they're not already engaged. Because still too few organizations actually have a DevSecOps model that is mature and is operational at scale, right? And so, you're typically going to find, I don't know, between 10 and 15% of the accounts that actually are thinking about DevSecOps today, and that's great. So, kudos to them. But for the other 85%, we can help kind of push them in a given direction to start the conversations and begin the collaboration process of who's doing what in the DevOps arena and how security teams can embed, within those organizations. And so that's more of a people and process conversation without even getting the products. The other thing I would say, touching on the product side, and this is where Tenable can help, is starting to shift left as much as possible, certainly as it relates to our business within the world of vulnerability management, right? So containers is a great example where organizations, when they want to secure Docker containers, they prefer to do so directly after the build during the quality assurance testing process. And so we have a product called Tenable.io Container Security that embeds natively within an organization's DevOps pipeline, within this continuous integrations systems that developers use. And after every new build that's been created, typically the DevOps runs a series of tests, quality tests, like integration tests, API tests. We want to make sure that security is just another test within that process, and so that you're looking for security issues like risky vulnerabilities that are exposed within the code, or misconfigured containers that are being deployed. And so we can actually address those issues before those containers actually reach production, and really help notify developers right then and there in the CI systems they use natively, what the security issue is and how to fix it. The same thing can be applied to in the world of traditional dynamic application security testing products as well. We have a product called Tenable.io Web Application Scanning that typically is used in production. But I think if you start to employ a shift left model, you can actually shift those tests further left, so that they run on a web application before they're deployed in production. Or as the application changes by the application teams, it should be part of the process that you kick off, or your organizations kick off a web application scan after every change to make sure that the web apps are secure and compliant with policies before they're running in production. And again, I think the key secret ingredient here is taking advantage of APIs to really enable this automation. And one of the benefits of the Tenable, certainly the Tenable.io platform in large, which is our risk-based VM platform in the cloud, is that we have highly extensible and open APIs that developers and organizations can use to start to build their own custom workflows very easily from scratch using our APIs.
That's interesting. And I think we were talking the other day around sort of Tenable and other technologies. There's kind of a nice link up to Splunk, for example, and some of the sort of value they offer. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, and so that's another great point. I mean, integrations is really the key part of making DevSecOps really successful. And so I was talking about APIs is one example of integrations that developers can kind of create from scratch very, very quickly to integrate security into their existing workflows. But the other aspect of integrations is the out of the box, pre-configured, already built types of integrations that plug into the existing security stack of an organization. And so we have, for example, at Tenable, over 100 different types of already created, ready to go integrations from over 70 different integration partners that security teams can use very, very quickly to wire in and really enrich those IT systems with asset and vulnerability misconfiguration and risk data, which is hugely beneficial to organizations that have a wide variety of different systems in place. And so Splunk is a great example where we have a great relationship with Splunk, where we have a number of integrations that cover our platform that can help enrich the Splunk SIM platforms with the latest vulnerability and threat data to really provide better insight across the entire organization and really help organizations be much more proactive at identifying and adding context to security events as they occur, making sure that vulnerabilities are part of that context and workflows. So, Splunk is one example. We have a number of integrations with ServiceNow, with Atlassian and Jira, with IBM, with BeyondTrust. You name it, we would very likely have an integration to support that partner. So, it's a very easy way to kind of sell more of a solution into an account versus a point product. And so, I think integrations are a huge part of the entire value proposition, not only for Tenable, but also for partners at large.
Absolutely, no, couldn't agree more. Well, look, guys, I think that's probably all for now. Thank you very much, Nate, for your time, for that insight into how Tenable can help our customers. And Adam, thank you too. And
thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye.